trying to count this hour.
Wait, who are you? And where did you leave your meat?
Obviously logic has it. Why else do you think I'm here? He stole it while I was bathing in the lake of fire to get this glorious demonic glow I have, and left a note with your address saying Eseth OU. So, here I am.
Well, I don't care. I don't accept any clients right now.
Okay, but, and hear me out on this one, I'm not a
Did that guy just drive over my Farley Lux? Hey, you!
Okay, I guess we're doing this now.
All right, everybody out there, good morning, good morning. Here is Cornelius Jones, and I am coming to you guys today with a video, and with this video...
Dude, stop talking to my tree and get your car out of...
Not going to be a long video at all, but I do want to have a topical discussion with those who are atheists, and those for everyone out there who does not believe that any God exists, or does not believe that God exists.
All right. If I answer your questions, will you get your bloody car out of my garden? All right.
I have a very direct question, and this is an argument that no atheist has ever heard before.
What? Is it an argument or a question? Or is it Schrodinger's question that you can ask and argue at the same time? This is too early for me. Let me get some coffee.
You know, if you look at YouTube, you'll find, there's plenty of discussions, debates surrounding this question concerning the existence of God. And one of the main things of topicals, one of the topics regarding this situation is talking about the evidence.
Okay, let's start with the basics. What God exactly are we talking about? The one that drowned people? The one that sent the hipster down and then killed him? The one who sent the Mortal Kombat devotee? The one who hides golden plates in hats? Or the one who maybe throws light bulbs at people? And these options barely scratch the surface here. There is no clarification whatsoever what you are talking about. I can assume, for the sake of argument, that you have some sort of stereotypical Christian God idea spooking around somewhere in your head. But for all I'm concerned, you could worship a lizard, or a cyber ghost, or the magical Mount Juju. You may take the word God for granted, but so do many other people from many other cultures with many other ideas of gods. So before anything else, you need a definition. Anyway, let's continue.
All right, many atheists, all atheists, they do not believe that there is a sufficient amount of evidence, or any evidence at all for that matter, that supports the existence of God.
Technically, I don't believe there's a sufficient amount of evidence that supports the existence of God, but not really. To clarify, it's not merely that I don't think there's a sufficient amount of evidence that supports the existence of God, but more so that I don't understand what a God is or how it functions, and as such, I can't evaluate the amount or quality of the alleged evidence or lack thereof. It's not as though I understand what a chair is, but I don't see sufficient evidence to believe that there's a chair in my room. It's more so that I don't know what a Davenport is, so I don't know if there's sufficient evidence in support of its existence next to the Chesterfield, which is across from the Schifferobe. For those of you listening who don't know what any of those things are, do you believe there's sufficient evidence to justify their existence?
Christians, on the contrary, they do believe that there's evidence that supports the existence of God. There are scientists out there who are Christians who have studied that evidence. However...
Studied what evidence? I know this video isn't about that evidence, but you're not going to speed past that like you didn't just say what you just said.
Hey, that's it? You let it be there and rush off after him just like that? Look, Caramelius.
Cornelius. He is called Cornelius.
Right. Look, Cornflakeus. The same way you claim that scientists found evidence for your particular God, there are people claiming that scientists found evidence for their particular God, too. Or several gods. The problem is, you and them are contradicting each other. And on top of that, what you understand under evidence may not be counting as evidence for them. Or even worse, for yourself, if applied to something that is not your God. And all of that is based on the assumption that we know what we're talking about, which we don't. What evidence? What scientists? And most importantly, evidence for what? When you shoot out these statements like this, all it does is virtue signal to your audience because pretty much no one else knows what the hell you're talking about.
However, atheists would disagree. Okay, so there's a big debate going back and forth about whether or not there's sufficient evidence and all of that. Well, I'd like to further the discussion by even asking this question. When it comes to creation, do you even need evidence?
Wait. Why do you sidetrack to creation all of a sudden? What does proving your God have to do with proving something different? If I prove to you that a hummingbird can fly on the spot, that doesn't prove the existence of levitation. It simply proves that a hummingbird can fly on the spot.
Creation? What is that? When you say creation, it implies to me that you already know that the alleged creation is creation. So of course you wouldn't think that you need evidence because you've already arrived at your conclusion. Why would you need evidence of something you think you already know?
Do you need evidence to know that whether or not something was created?
Well, you might not, but I do. So my answer is yes, I do need evidence. But that brings up a question I would have for you. Do you need evidence to know whether you turn the light off when you go to sleep? Yes? No? I would bet that you probably rely on evidence all the time, whether you do it consciously or not. For example, you don't need to stand up from your bed to check whether or not you turned off the light switch, because it's either bright or it's dark. So you have your evidence, even if you didn't actually look for it. If you set up a pot with cold water and you come back and you feel the heat and the steam comes off of it, you don't need to check whether you turned the stove on. You might still do it, but you already have some evidence for it without any deliberate research. And you probably rely on those small cues throughout your day constantly. Now, with that in mind, would it not perhaps hypothetically be possible that some people would want to apply that kind of thinking consistently and ask for evidence for a God too, especially when they don't see the steam coming off of it?
How do you know whether or not something was created? Whatever answer you give sounds indistinct from evidence you are using to support your claim. Or would you say that you don't know how you know something is created? If so, then what's the difference between knowing something and believing that you know something? Because saying that you don't know how you know sounds indistinct from saying that you believe you know something.
And of course, atheists will say, absolutely, it is foolish to believe in the existence of something blindly without having evidence or without looking into the evidence first.
No, not all and not always. There is a lot of woo-woo that a lot of atheists believe in. Sadly. Sadly. Unfortunately for you, this has nothing to do with your God and your arguments. Your ideas will be judged based on their merits regardless of how many godly or ungodly people believe in a bunch of nonsense.
Also, you seem to have switched focus again. It was my understanding that we're discussing knowledge, not belief. I can believe that Isa didn't steal my red velvet cookies without checking, but I can't honestly claim that I know it.
Well, I would like to ask a very, very simple question, because I would like with this video, my intention is to challenge the idea that you need evidence to believe in something. Okay?
You don't. You can believe in fairies and goblins. You can believe anything you want without evidence. How true that anything is, however, is a completely different story.
If you're not looking at the evidence first, then pray tell, what are you looking at?
That's what I want to challenge. I want to challenge the idea, do you really need evidence, or is it possible to believe or know, and specifically know, that something was created without looking at the evidence first?
As said before, you don't. But Corbatius brings up a rather interesting point here, because humans are prone to constantly pick up information without any verification. If, for example, you see an out-of-order sticker on a vending machine, you're far more likely to just accept that statement than to throw in a few coins to see whether that statement is accurate or not. We get conditioned to certain facts and routines, and as long as what we experience doesn't diverge greatly from what we are used to, we tend to not give it much of a second thought. That is normal human behavior. It only becomes a problem if whatever we take for granted turns out not to be true.
So can you know it first and then look at the evidence? Is that possible? Is that reasonable?
So it seems like what you're saying is it's not so much that we look for something else before we look at the evidence, but more so that we know before looking at the evidence. But this prompts the obvious question as to how you know something before looking at the evidence. Assuming that you do in fact know how you know something without looking at the evidence, how is that any different than possessing sufficient evidence? Assuming that you don't know how you know without looking at the evidence, how is that different than assuming you know something?
Well, I'd like to show you an argument with this question, with this illustration. Consider this. In our lifetime, if you were born in the, mid 80s, 90s, maybe at the latest, I'm 40 years old. So if you're 40 or older, then 100% sure, or maybe a little younger, you remember a time on our planet where there was no internet. The internet is one of the most life-changing inventions that totally revolutionized the way we live as human beings on this planet. And you all know that. But there was a time where the internet did not exist. There was a time where you had no prior knowledge, you had no prior experience with the internet. Okay?
Actually, I would argue the latter statement is true and applies to everyone regardless of age. Because humans are not born with inherent knowledge of the internet, so in everyone's life, there was a time where they had no prior knowledge of the internet. I bring this point up because I find it odd that you brought up the age of the internet as well as age in general, since having no prior knowledge of the internet is something that we've all experienced at some point, right?
So if you are an atheist, I want you to go back to that time, if you can, to the very first time you ever used the internet, if you can remember that far. Okay? Now, you did not have prior knowledge about the internet the first time you used it. You did not have any prior anything, never experienced the internet before.
Not to be nitpicky, but you can know about the internet without ever using it. And you can use the internet without hardly any idea of what the internet actually is. I remember my grandmother in her mid-stages of Alzheimer's struggling to make sense of anything. All she knew was that if she typed a message on the computer and clicked send, it would shortly later pop up on my screen, somehow. It could have been magic for all she knew or cared. Using something and having knowledge about something are two different things.
However, from the first moment you used the internet, you knew that the internet was the product of a mind.
Putting aside the issue of how you know what I knew, no, as a matter of fact, I didn't. I didn't know that the internet was the product of a mind because I didn't know what the internet was, or what a mind was, for that matter. If people just knew that the internet was the product of a mind, why didn't they also just know what it was or how it functioned? Why is it that this knowledge without evidence only applies to whether or not something was created by a mind?
You knew that its creation was, you knew it was a creation is basically what I'm trying to say.
Let's go just a little bit off topic for a moment. If, for the sake of argument, we would apply the internet analogy to this whole God creation business, then why not apply it consistently? You see, the internet was not a one-man endeavor. It took many people with many smart ideas to get it patchworked together over time. A collaboration, if you will. So, who are the people who inspired your God? Who was the guy who inspired the solar systems? Who was the guy who inspired the chemicals or the physics? Maybe it was no God at all, but a bunch of drunk aliens who had some fun with a random planet. You don't think so? No? How do you know? Don't you see the cheekiness all around you? Don't you feel their mischief in your heart? I mean, after all, there is no real need for evidence to know it, right? You see, even if we were to accept your odd creation argument hook, line, and sinker, it would still not be any evidence whatsoever for your one God, which, if I remember correctly, is what you were actually after.
Now, is there sufficient evidence that the internet had a creator? Absolutely. I mean, we don't even have to get into that.
Actually, I think we do. Not because I enjoy the idea of you trying to educate me on the internet, but because it's important to mention how we know things so we can give useful frameworks to apply elsewhere. If you don't think we need evidence to know things, how do you know there is evidence that the internet was created? You started out knowing that the internet had a creator before looking at the evidence, so why would you look at the evidence for something you already know? If you didn't start out knowing the internet had a creator, wouldn't whatever led you to know that the internet had a creator be considered evidence and undermine your point?
But the point is, even though yes, there was sufficient evidence, but did you need the evidence to know the internet had a creator?
Yes, I did. I didn't know what the internet or a mind was, so I couldn't know anything about it without any evidence.
If I asked you right now, who created the internet? Who initially created the internet? I'm willing to bet that most of you would not be able to tell me.
Yes, let us talk about that. But to start, let us define create for a second. Because if we talk about who invented the internet, we have a whole group of people. Paul Baran and Donald Davies came up with the packaging of information, and Leonard Kleinrock and Robert Taylor figured out how to actually apply it. And there are many, many, many more people who contributed. And if instead we talk about building it, then you would have to include every single person who draws cables, sets up new servers, builds modern telephone poles, sends satellites into space, or places a functioning modem into a new household. Because they all contribute to creating and expanding the internet. And if, like me, you're wondering what the hell information packaging is and what it has to do with internet, then you might notice that the question of who created the internet might seem far less relevant than the question of what is the internet and how on earth does it work.
Now, you could easily figure that out. You could do some research. But if you're honest, when you first used the internet, you did not do an extensive research or study on who created it.
This is correct. However, it's important to note why I didn't do extensive research into it. This was primarily because I lacked the ability as a child to do proper research and straight up didn't care as an adult. It's not the case that I didn't do extensive research because I just knew the internet was created. Instead, I didn't do extensive research because all I cared about was what it was and how it functioned. You could do extensive research into who created the TV, which is nice and all, but I fail to see how that's at all necessary to the goal of learning what a TV is and how it functions. Also, while I'm complaining, I've been ignoring it for the most part, but you never really clarified what it means to know something and how knowing something is distinct from believing something. My understanding is that knowledge requires some sort of standard or basis while belief does not. Based on this, I can easily understand how one can believe something without evidence. However, I don't understand how one can know something without evidence. Basically, beliefs are things you can leap to, while knowing something requires more than just not evidence.
I am not sure that I agree with that definition in this particular case. Not because it's a bad definition. In fact, it's a perfectly sound one, but because I doubt that all parties would agree with that definition. And thus, by using it, we would just talk past each other. Clearly
Cornelius.
Yeah, right. Clearly Cordelius does not agree. He thinks that belief and knowledge are to an extent interchangeable. Or as he would put it, know it in your heart. There is no evidence required to know something from your heart. In fact, there is no evidence that you can know something from your heart, but that's a different story. And in spite of the fact that his is an utterly useless approach, it is a frighteningly common one. I have yet to meet the person who wouldn't instinctively discard or accept ideas based on feelings, if a topic is of enough personal importance to them. So with that in mind, I will accept his wacky definition of knowing and point out instead that it won't be of any use to him. I can know in my heart all I want that the earth is flat. That still won't make the earth suddenly flat. Nor will it convince anyone who wants to figure out what the truth actually is. Which, incidentally, is what Corny here is trying to do.
All you knew inside your heart, all you knew in your mind was that it was created by someone. But you may not have known who.
Are you sure you wouldn't have known in your heart instead that it developed by itself and was a mechanical tumor? I mean, both of those ideas would have the same amount of evidence, namely feelings. So my question to you would be, what mechanism do you use to establish whether or not you are wrong? Because you see, the internet is evidence for the internet, and that's it. If you discover or use the internet, then you know that the internet is something, that it is there, and that's it. It reminds me a lot of the watchmaker's argument. So let me modernize it a bit and start off with that. If you see alien tech on the beach, would you know that it was created? And if you really think about it, the answer is actually no. You might assume it is, you might believe it is, but you could also look at it and think, what an awkward looking shell. Because you wouldn't even necessarily recognize it as alien, or technology for that matter.
Now, you can't say that you had prior knowledge that helped you understand that the internet was created, because the first time you used it, you had no prior knowledge. And in your lifetime, there was a time where the internet did not exist. So you can't say prior knowledge. Prior knowledge does not count in this situation because you had none.
I had no prior knowledge of the internet, but I may have had prior knowledge of its components, which serves as evidence that it was created. If I had no prior knowledge of the internet, but I knew what a screen was, what a TV is, or what other similar looking devices were, I could logically infer based on my prior knowledge of those similar things that this thing was the product of a mind based on those similarities.
Yet, you knew that the internet had a creator. My question is, why? Why did you know that? Before you looked at any evidence, before you did any research on who the creator was, without any prior knowledge with this thing or any prior experience, you automatically knew that this invention had a creator. You knew that it was the product of a mind, as opposed to something similar to, like, maybe comparable to natural selection.
Yes, but that's because I know what those categories are and how they function. I know what it means for something to be the product of a mind. I know what it means for something to occur naturally without the intervention of a mind. And once I know what the internet is, I can see which category it fits into. The evidence would be my prior knowledge of the aforementioned categories and an understanding of what the internet is and how it functions. If you don't know what natural occurrences are, if you don't know what it means for something to be created by a mind, and if you don't know what the internet is or how it functions, in what sense and by what method, excluding evidence, have you concluded that you know the internet was created?
Where somehow, electrons, molecules just happen to form together in some amazing way appropriately, and the internet formed all by itself. You know that's not the case with the internet.
Again, I would only know that wasn't the case if I knew what the internet was. And if I knew what the internet was, I would have evidence to suggest it was or was not created by a mind.
Now, of course, again, we know there is evidence for the internet. It doesn't matter. My point is not that whether or not there's evidence for the internet. My point is, you did not need the evidence to know the internet had a creator. The first time you used it, From that instant, you knew in your heart some person created it. It is the product of a mind.
If you had no idea about the internet, then you wouldn't have known, nor could you have known, whether or not the internet was created. You could have assumed it. In fact, if you were primed since childhood to believe that everything is created, then you would have been very likely to assume it. And you might have been so confident about your assumption that you would have claimed that you know. But you would have had no verification whatsoever whether or not your assumption was actually true. I feel like I'm repeating myself. Am I repeating myself? I'm repeating myself. I'm leaving. I'm gonna sit in a corner.
Now, if you tell me that the reason why you know the internet has a creator is because of evidence, you're not being honest.
But, as I clearly demonstrated, I needed to know what the internet was, how it functions, and what it means for something to be created by a mind versus naturally occurring in order to know whether or not it requires a creator. However, this brings up an interesting side note. What if I didn't know at first sight? You insist that I knew without needing evidence, but what if I told you I just didn't know? Your argument itself hinges on the premise that I knew the internet was created by a mind in exactly the same way that the watchmaker argument hinges on my knowledge of what a watch is. At the end of the day, thus far, this is a discount watchmaker argument. If you were pretty much anywhere and you came across the internet, you wouldn't just assume it happened randomly through natural selection. You would assume it was the product of intelligent design, created by a mind. So by no means is this a new argument I've never heard before.
You're not being honest. You did not do an extensive research on who created the internet the first time you used it.
I'm willing to grant that most people probably didn't do extensive research into who made the internet, but the fact still remains that doesn't mean they didn't do any extensive research into what the internet is or how it functions or whether or not it's naturally occurring or man-made. One more thing, as pointed out earlier, they could easily have known based on prior knowledge of similar things like movies or TV screens and how those things require a mind to create them, or they could have simply not known altogether.
The time you used the internet, you used it, and you knew it was the product of a mind. You knew that innately in your heart. You knew that. Again, the question's why.
I would ask you how you know what other people knew in their hearts during their first encounter with the internet, but given the amount of time left in the video, I'll just say, okay, I believe you.
So you see, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who are atheists, I am showing you one example that I don't think you can deny. You used something, you had experience with something that before that day you had no prior understanding or knowledge, and you knew it had a creator without looking at the evidence, before you ever looked at any evidence.
Okay, and follow me on this one. What if I do deny it? Your argument in no way accounts for the realistic possibility of me simply not knowing if the internet was created by a mind, while simultaneously dismissing anyone who says they knew because they had evidence by calling them dishonest without even knowing what evidence they are citing. Another problem with this argument is you just telling me what I know and calling me dishonest when I say otherwise. Even more egregious than that, you're telling me that my line of reasoning is I knew nothing and had no prior knowledge of the internet. I had an experience with the internet in which I discovered no evidence and no evidence was presented. Therefore, I innately knew in my heart that the internet was created by a mind. And frankly, that reasoning sucks. Plus, it's so stupid it borders on insulting. If you're going to dictate my knowledge to me, at least make it so it's better than whatever this is. Seriously, you could swap out internet for a watch and this would function exactly like the watchmaker argument, just without you explicitly saying, because complexity, therefore God.
My question, again, is why? Why were you able to know that? Why? That's what I'd like you to answer. Why do you think you were able to know or reason in your heart that someone created the internet before you looked at any evidence? That's the question. And I'm going to leave it at that.
Good. You asked, and you just heard Skeptis and my reply to it. But I have something to add. Something that, while it will not help you argue this point any better, might perhaps help you to understand the problem with your argument a little bit more. And perhaps it can give you a better starting point for your future arguments. You see, who created is a thought that occurs to you, because you are primed for it, trained to think that way, in a sense. Someone with a different upbringing, or even just a different kind of mindset, might look at the internet and never ever come up with such a question. It would just not compute. So if you want to convince people that what you believe is true, the best way to start is by figuring out how they think, not what they believe. And with that information, you can pack your arguments in a manner that is far more clear to them. Finally! Look how many flame liliacs he drove over! That weirdo! Thank you all for...
Seth, why do these cookies taste and smell like my meat?
I don't... Wait a second. Your meat? How do you even know what it tastes like?
I, know it in my heart. Anyway, I'm late for Satan's marriage to 2020, so bye.
Wait! The party was called off because Satan was caught in flagrante with 21. Where was I? Oh yes! Thank you all for watching. If you like this video, please like, share and subscribe and leave a juicy comment. And if you really like what I do, please consider supporting me. These wonderful people are all supporting me already, and they're all super amazing. Also, if you want to have my videos and those of Logic a day in advance, please subscribe to list.logic.com and you will discover videos that no one has seen before. Wait, what's that?
Thanks for the cookies. I appreciate you all a lot. Skeptic Skeleton.
That is so romantic. And I didn't even have to tie him to my couch for it. Why don't you do me a favor, my dear reptoids, and click on the link, fly over, subscribe, and watch him closely. Maybe leave a comment to say hi. Thank you all for watching, and have a great evening.